Hi, my name is Alex Patel, and I decided to start a blog about, politics, economics, some of my passions, and called it the Patelian Model. Why not? So my first blog I wrote, and I like to write, but I figured I like to speak too, and maybe doing a video blog would be cool as well. So in today's discussion, I want to talk about the link between the blaming of victims when it comes to sexual assault, or blaming of the government when it comes to macroeconomic policy, the reasons behind that, and how we can improve upon the mistakes that we've made. Now, a lot of these things seem unrelated, and I somehow put it all together watching the movie She's Out of My League, which I watched a few days ago. Pretty good movie, if you ask me. The movie doesn't really have a lot to do with what I'm going to talk about, but for some reason I was able to put all the pieces together. Some people like take a nap or sleep, and that's how they are able to solve these subconscious puzzles. I like to watch movies and television, and somehow I put things together. But I think I came to some pretty profound realizations. So right now, we know that sexual assault is a really big problem. And if you've been watching on the news, you know that that's especially a problem when it comes to women in the military. Because a lot of times, it's the women that are being blamed, not the perpetrators of rape or sexual assault and things like that. And a lot of times, women have a hard time, especially in the military, reported that. In the military, it's underreported. It's in the chain of command. There is no civilian aspect, so that women have a hard time, especially if their commanding officers who they have to report to are the ones doing these injustices. They can't. It doesn't really make sense for them to report to them. It just wouldn't work out, right? So for the solution for that is having a civilian, non-military related case where women can have an objective view and private view to get these cases out. But what I want to talk about more is why is that? Why is it that we blame the victim in that case? But what I found was that the arguments about blaming women, oh, they're wearing certain clothes, oh, they're doing this. No, women, 0% blame. They deserve 0% of the blame. They do nothing to deserve that violence. But what I find interesting is that the arguments behind that seem to be very similar to the arguments behind attacking the government when it came to this recent economic disaster. The reason is the arguments were like against the government were very similar. You'd see that, oh, the government let us do that in terms of the corporations and big businesses. Oh, they had lax regulations. They let us do it. Oh, they didn't do enough. Things like that. All these things that are ironic because it's these same often neocons that strip the government of its ability to do anything. A policy known as Starve the Beast, and then they blame the government for not being effective because they took away the funds in order to do so. So it doesn't make any sense. And what I realized is, wow, blaming victims in terms of government policy and in terms of sexual assault actually shares this common, reasons of blaming the victim essentially. And so I began to realize what is the causes behind that. I began to think. And so this is what I came together with. America has a very big sense of pride, and when we teach our history classes, it's always America is number one, we're the greatest country in the world, and things like that. And I think, believe it or not, that might seem unrelated to the why we blame victims, but I think that's why we do it. And let me explain why. So we have this idea that America is number one, that it's perfect, infallible. But then reality hits home. We see problems every day. We have a big economic collapse in the latter half of the 2000s. And so as we piece this together, it creates the sense of denial. And I think that's the big part. We've been so led up into this cult of personality of the United States that it's so perfect that in order to deal with the actual realities when they're horrible and that show that America isn't the greatest in every aspect, we create this sense of denial. We find scapegoats, and those are the people that we blame. So when it comes to hollowing out government, we blame government when in reality the government that governs best. And that's a Jon Stewart quote, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But same with women. Oh, it's the women, not the men. It's their fault for some reason. That's the logic. Now that's obviously very flawed logic, but that's the logic that you often hear. Especially it was disgusting to hear CNN talk about that with that one case not too long ago. I think it was like Studeville or something like that. I forgot the exact name of the area. But I think it's a sense of denial. I think we have to have a more balanced approach. And I think a way to look at that is Germany. Now, I think Germany has the opposite problem, and America is nowhere near getting as close to Germany and their thing. And they have the opposite problem in that they showed too many of the bad things. obviously Hitler and Nazism left a bad legacy for Germany, and that's true. But it led to almost like too much. If you look at the German culture today, it's very, very, very much trying to distance any sense of nationalism and trying to like distill any sense, even remotely relating to Hitler or Nazism or Third Reich, etc. And so they show a lot of the negatives. Now, when it comes to the United States, I think we should have a balanced approach. That good balance. I think America is a great country, and there's many things to be proud of, but there's also some bad things that we do. And I think doing that creates a sense where we're not so much in denial because we can accept that we make mistakes. We need a little ounce of humility in order to do better. And scapegoating has really been a big problem for America. We blamed Native Americans, we blamed the Irish, we blamed Asians, we blame Latin Americans, Latinos, Latinas. Now we're blaming Middle Easterners, and it seems like all this denial that we hold America on such a high pedestal that we could never fill, and therefore will lead to a sense of denial whenever something bad happens. And in order to alleviate that, you need to create a sense of humility. And I think you do that by showing a balanced approach of history. So when you teach history classes, you showcase the good and the bad and create this sense that America has good things and bad things. And that's about it. We're just a nation like any other things, or like any other country. We're not immune from any disasters. We make mistakes. And I think doing that allows us to take the blame off the victims, put it kind of on ourselves as a society, and move forward and try to solve these problems. And the whole reason I'm writing this blog is in the hope that we can create that better society that doesn't blame the victims, especially in terms of sexual assault, but also in the arguments that are used against the government. And that's what I wanted to talk about. John Stewart has this brilliant quote, and that's, "The government that governs best governs best." And I like that because I think there's this view by many neocons that the government is inherently bad. Not this government, but just government itself. But that's not true. I think government can do a lot of good. At the same time, I think there are areas where the government shouldn't play that big of a part. So it's all about a case by case basis, I would say. In some cases, I think the government needs to do a lot more in terms of promoting small businesses, in terms of creating more competition. And believe it or not, regulation actually increases competition if it's done right. Because believe it or not, fair or free markets do not necessarily equal competitive markets. And that's what I'm going to cover in a blog in the future. But the point I want to get at is that government has the choice to be good or bad, and that's how we affect it and where we allocate funding and resources. And so there isn't this. And so I basically want to end this idea that it's inherently bad. I'm not saying it's perfect or free of blame or accountability. And believe me, there needs to be a lot of accountability, especially when it comes to civil rights issues, wiretapping. We've seen the news with the NSA and PRISM, PRISM, and all that, and the idea of all our information being out there. Um, but regardless, my whole idea is to show that we can go forward. And so the bottom line takeaway from this blog post today is one, it is never okay to blame the victims. Now, the government example is a little different because there has to be accountability there, but at least when it comes to sexual assault, it is never the woman's fault. Never put it on the women. Put it on the people doing these injustices, doing these heinous acts. Number two, we need to have a balanced view of how we view the United States. We're a country, we're made of people, people are not perfect, therefore this country is not perfect either. There's many great things about America, and granted, I'd rather live here than in a lot of places in the world. But that isn't to say that we haven't had our fair share of mishaps, bad policies, just sad moments. Every country has. And I think if we can create that, then that eliminates a sense of denial because then we can cope with the real world when the country does mess up or something bad happens that's out of our control. And we can learn how to move forward and actually do something about it rather than just trying to find a scapegoat, which I think that's why we blame victims most of the time. And lastly, that government is not inherently bad. To be fair, it doesn't automatically become good either. But the idea is a government is as good as we put the time and resources into it. And right now, there's a lot of problems with it. There's too much money in politics. The way the direction of government policy headed is bad. But government hasn't always been bad. It was government policy that helped us have tremendous growth in the United States from the 1940s to the 1960s, even after the war. And it was only after starving the beast, so to speak, in the Reagan era that we really see enormous inequality and other things. But that's obviously a discussion for another day. So that's this blog post. I hope you enjoyed it. By the way, if I say my V is a little weird, it's like a slight tick I have. Not a big deal. I hope you enjoyed that, and hopefully you take something away from that. Have a good day.